Good afternoon, QChurch, and welcome to our house. This afternoon, we are here together as a community on a quest for a refreshed perspective on life. Now, tomorrow on Monday, the 11th of November, we'll be celebrating the life of Barbara Bradley. There will be a short committal at York Crematorium at 10:20 a.m, followed by a service at 11 o'clock back here at Q. Now, there'll be no Wednesday night IQ get-together this week, so why not catch up on the latest talks from IQ by heading to the media page at qyork.co.uk. Now, don't forget that this year our Christmas at Our House celebration will be on Sunday, the 22nd of December, and then we'll take a break for Christmas, so there'll be no service this year on Sunday, the 29th of December. If you're a guest with us this afternoon, then welcome to Q. On the pew in front of you, you'll find Welcome to Our House cards, which are there to help us get to know each other. So feel free to fill one in and hand it to a steward. Everything that we do here at Q can only happen because of the generous people all around you. Now, the easiest way to support Q and all we're doing here together as a community is to hit the donate button at qyork.co.uk. Now, if you'd like to make a cash or cheque donation instead today, then you can use the black and white envelopes in front of you, and we'll take a collection later on this afternoon. After the final song today, there will be drinks and snacks served in the foyer, and we'll have half an hour to relax and chat over a cuppa, whilst our 5 to 11-year-olds have 30 minutes of fun and games with our Life Zone team. Now, tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, on the 11th day of the 11th month, many people across the world will pause to remember those who have been affected by conflicts throughout history. But some might ask, why should we look back? Isn't it better to leave the past in the past? Doesn't that stop us living in the moment now? And so this afternoon we're going to explore how looking back might help us with our lives today, as we set off on a quest for remembrance.
See Can't help but thinking, I thank you. Yeah, you didn't have to give me joy. Joy. Didn't have to give me peace. Peace. Didn't have to give me a thing. No. 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 Hey. Thank you for the morning. Thank you for the music. All night long. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey. Thank you for the morning. And thank you for the music. All night long. Hey, 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 hey. You still got me one more day. One more day. To sing your praise. One more day to sing your praise. Woo!
It's quite a powerful video, that, and we chose that because there is not one of us in here tonight that doesn't have sort of a connection with that. And even though we're remembering, the First World War and the Second World War, there's some of us who don't have any connections with it, but we do have a memory of that day. And I thought it was quite powerful to say, okay, if that is part of your story, how does that work with you? Now, it's interesting, over the last few weeks, we've talked about breaking free from that which haunts us. And last week, we talked about keeping free of those things that haunt us. And so this week, it would seem a bit contradictory to start remembering. It's like, hang on, what are you doing here? But it's because that's what we hold in tension, isn't it? We want to be free, but at the same time, we want to remember, and we want to remember for proper reasons. And the reason why we remember is so that we don't go back or follow that same pattern that took us where we were. And so tonight we want to remember, but in Q's usual fashion, we're not just talking about remembrance in a very narrow way. We're wanting to talk about remembering in general. How do we remember, and what do we remember, and what are the reasons we remember, which is quite a powerful thing. So we've just celebrated Bonfire Night, and I thought it was interesting that if we were to ask our children, what are we celebrating this for? The majority are going to say, well, we have fireworks and we have toffee apples and we have fun, and we go, the week before we maybe go trick-or-treating. But if you were to ask them, what do we do it for? I think you'd find it quite strange. They wouldn't have a memory of the real reason. And I'm not sure whether it matters sometimes why. There are people who are very much into politics who would say, there is a good reason and we mustn't forget it. But you see, that depends how you're wired, doesn't it? So, the reason why that happened was because some people decided that we're going to blow up the Houses of Parliament. I've never understood why we want to celebrate blowing up the Houses. I mean, really, it doesn't go with my head. Why do you celebrate the failed attempts to blow up the Houses of Parliament? I don't know. But anyway, you see what I mean. We remember it, but many people don't know why we remember it. But anyway, it's important, though, that we remember that if our memories lead us towards hatred rather than towards a loving action, it's important, because we can all get stuck in remembering things from our past, which only cultivates a desire for vengeance or a desire for getting your own back, you know what I mean? But we want to only remember that which takes us towards loving action. So, like I say, today it's the remembrance of the First World War, and it was supposed to be a war that ended all wars, but did it? No. So something went wrong, and so we ended up with World War II. And the clip you've just watched, like I said, brings it a little bit more into our present day where we're aware that warring is going on all the time. I mean, I was absolutely blown away that over 340,000 people have died in the war in Syria since 2011. Just think about that for a minute. It's unbelievable. 340,000 people. And we would say, well, that's not happening to us, but it's going on. And the sad thing is that whether we want to make a stand and say we remember, you could say, well, what's the point of remembering? Because somehow it seems to bypass the memory and people still do what they want to do. And that's what's really quite sad. But anyway, I'm more connected with World War II because my dad was in the RAF, and there's some of you here who've got memories. I think it wasn't you, Leah. Wasn't there a connection on Facebook? Was it your granddad or whatever? My dad was a radar operator, and he was one of the first to be in that. But you see, the thing is, the memory that I have is that my dad was only 5'6", and he'd gone into the RAF when he was 18 years old. And had he been taller, he would have been assigned to Bomber Command. And had he been assigned to Bomber Command, I don't know whether I would be here today. But because he was short, I mean, I'm laughing because I find that quite comical. Because he was short, he wasn't allowed to go into Bomber Command, but he was put into Coastal Command, which meant he was the first of radar operators, which is quite a, claim to fame in my family. And he probably saved his life. And so they're the things I remember about World War II. I also remember that my mother used to harp on, and if there's any here who used to do the same, about ration books. I am not kidding you. She would tell me all the time that they would be allowed 2 ounces of butter per week. 2 ounces of butter. And so if we ever spread too much butter on our toast, you can imagine the looks and the glares that we would get. Because even though we were living in the freedom of what had happened for us, my mother still lived in the rationing of the books that she had 2 ounces of butter. And I'm not kidding you, that wasn't so good. So anyway, it is said that couples who don't learn from their fights break up. People who don't learn from their mistakes don't mature. It is also said that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. I don't know if that's true, but that's what is said. And it's also said that it's only the dead who actually have seen the end of war. That's quite daunting, isn't it, to think that only the dead have seen the end of war. So are we as humans given a certain irrationality that leads us down certain paths over and over again? Is it because we really do forget? So what we wanted to do tonight, and I know Q is quite weird, and I'm quite happy to say that is who we are. We wanted to associate tonight with a theme which is going to be very sensitive, and I understand that because that's just who we are. And we really felt that there was a sad parallel to the whole issue of whether we forget or don't remember in the context of another parallel in life, and that is when people have dementia or have Alzheimer's and they suddenly lose all memory. It's one of the most heartbreaking tragedies in a human life to lose all memory. And you might think, well, why are you doing this? It's because in my head, if we forget, we become like that because we decide that nothing of the story of our life affects where we are. And it's quite important. When we can't remember, that's when we understand the crucial nature of our memory, for good and for bad. If you lose your story, who are you? Where have you been? Where are you going? And the same is true of society. If we have no common remembered past, then we no longer have a common sense of purpose or direction, belonging or being. And we become individuals all traveling different paths. We become, as it were, a senile society. And that's really quite sad, because there is nothing that binds us together of a common story. Now, this is what a journalist who I was reading just the other day said, and I find this quite amazing. He said this: history is vital to a nation's survival, just as memory is to an individual. Without it, we lose our bearings. And that's quite powerful, isn't it? That without remembering certain things, we don't know how to navigate our lives, both good and bad. We not only forget our way home, but we forget the road that leads us towards destruction or despair. And most likely, we are unable to make that return journey. So we want to be sensitive tonight. And I am very aware that there are people in this place who are having to handle the relationships that occur with people who have that illness of dementia and Alzheimer's, and we're not for 1 minute wanting to not understand that it must be absolutely awful. And for all of those who are suffering with that, or we want to remember them today. See, it's about remembering. Can we remember what it must be like for people to have no memory? It must be absolutely horrendous. And so it is said that when a man loses his memory, he loses everything. And the next clip that we're going to show, there's a couple of clips tonight. And like I say, I hope I've set it up well, because what you see is the terrible thing that happens when we forget. So memory and remembering is so important. And life is precious, and we have to remember it can be gone in a flash. But if we are willing to keep telling the story that we know, it might be that at some point it can bring everybody back as we tell that story. This is what remembering does. I always remember a while ago that to remember, if you put the and then a gap, member means to put back together. And when we forget, we allow those things to stay ever dismembered in our memories, and things really do die if we don't remember. So hope you enjoy tonight.
I guess the point we're trying to make tonight, which I think is very important, is that remembering is critically important to our wholeness and our well-being. And like Chris said, one of the reasons we sensitively wanted to use this clip, and there's another clip goes with this, about Alzheimer's or dementia, is to show that when a person loses sight of the memory, it affects their existence, not only now, the future, it affects their relationships, and we become incomplete and unwhole because we don't remember. I don't know if any of you watched the movie that came out last year, They Shall Not Grow Old. It's a version of film shots that were taken during World War I that have been digitally colored. So now you have a colored impression of all this very interesting real life stories, real life experiences. And as I saw a bit of that this week and looked into the eyes of some of those young men who were there, I thought, would I have been brave enough? Could I have done it? You see what was demanded of them, and the conditions they lived in. Of course, the officer would tell you either go that way towards the German trenches or you come this way and I'll shoot you. So, not very nice. And, you say, well, that's 100 years ago. Does it really matter? But if that doesn't matter, then last week doesn't matter. And your childhood doesn't matter. And the war that you had at home doesn't matter, and the abuse that you suffered doesn't matter. You see, if that doesn't matter, nothing else matters. And our memories are very important, because every story, you know, and particularly tomorrow we remember the armistice of the First World War. Every story has importance far beyond the boundaries of its own existence. Every story. And every memory adds context to the content of that story. So the problem is, if we don't have memory, we can't add context to the story of our life. And memory is not just helpful when it's happy. Memory is helpful, whatever that memory is, because without it, we don't have the context for the content that we can then deal with. Memory is one of the most powerful abilities of the brain. And if we lose it, we lose a huge part of ourselves. Sometimes we want to lose it. See, that's the issue. Sometimes we want to lose it. Things that we look back on, they carry pain, they carry hardship, they carry difficulty. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to think about it. We want to lose it. We want to ignore it. We want to hide it. But in doing so, we lose part of who we are. And that's important for all of our wholeness. When we have no shared memory, Chris used a great phrase in that other thing, we lose our bearings. And there's something about our ability to deal with all of our memories that affects our bearings, the direction we go, how we navigate our way through life. So the truth would be that memory is actually there to help and guide us, not torment and terrorize us. Even though the truth is memories do torment and terrorize us. Memories can be painful, but if we can take them in the proper sense and not ignore them, then they help us and they guide us and stop tormenting and terrorizing us because they're taking us somewhere. Memories can become intertwined with all kinds of things, and then they become edited for palatability. So one of the things you learn in psychology is that we have an innate ability in the brain to edit our memories so that we can actually blank out some memories because those memories were too painful. Or we adjust the memories so that we only have the good bits so that we don't have the bad bits. Now I understand that, and it helps us, it helps to ease the pain of memory. But the problem is it doesn't help us to deal with the root of the pain of the memory. So a pain ignored is not a pain healed. But a pain remembered is a pain healed. A situation remembered is a situation that has the potential for change. And that's why we remember what we're remembering, and that's why memories are important. I like, if you understand anything about God and the Bible, God has an unedited version of your life and my life. And one of the verses I love in Psalm 103, it says, He remembers that we are but dust because He knows our frame. Now, that's an unedited version that says God doesn't edit out of our lives the issues, the failures, the weaknesses, the problems. He's quite happy to accommodate that because He knows if we can accommodate that with the grace that flows, then out of our frailty will actually come strength if we do it. But like Chris says, the war to end all wars unfortunately didn't end all wars because we didn't learn the lessons from it. So the truth is some memories should be kept alive. Painful, yes, but some memories should be kept alive because to lose them means a lesson lost and potentially a repeat of past mistakes. So if we're going to heal the memories have to be allowed to be memories so that we can find the healing and hopefully get a lesson that will not repeat the past mistakes that we've had. To remember the right way is to remember our existence. Now get this just as a little thought. The word remember is made up of 2 Latin words and 2 Greek words, and of course into English it's made up of the words re and member. Now when we put them together, we only associate remember with bringing to mind something from the past. But you see, the actual word, if you break it down, is to remember, to put back together. And when we learn to deal with memories correctly, it allows us to be put back together. It allows others to be put back together. If in the context we talked about sensitively of something like Alzheimer's or dementia, if the memories can be brought back, you are remembered. And you'll see in the next clip how this lady comes back
just for a little while, because in remembering, she is remembered, and that's what we want for you. So let me finish with this. Remembering can produce hate, indifference, sorrow, or love. It's not the thing itself, but how we choose to process it. Loss of memory creates extreme reactions which lack balance through loss of bearings. And you will see how loss of memory can be so frustrating in a medical sense that it creates extreme reactions. And when we don't associate correctly with the memories of the past, it creates extreme reactions, which if they come out as anger or hate or indifference or sorrow, become very destructive in our lives. So memory is very powerful. But here's the lesson of history, of the ages, of all that we're remembering. Memory is very powerful, but let it drive you to loving action. There's a grace for that if you're open to receive it.
Awesome. Beautiful.
You walked with me, footprints in the sand, and help me understand where I'm going. You walked with me when I was all alone, with so much unknown along the way. Then I heard you say, I promise you I'm always there. When your heart is filled with sorrow and despair, I'll carry you when you
Good afternoon. How are we doing? Now, I know we've gone from quite a somber, intense moment, but we're going to play a game now, just to lighten the mood a little bit. I watched an incredible program yesterday on Netflix called Tell Me Who I Am. And it links really into what we're doing today, because it was about a set of twins, and when they're 18, one of them had a motorbike accident, banged his head, and forgot his whole life. He didn't remember anything at all. He didn't even know who he was, who his parents were. The only thing he remembered was his twin, and he knew that his twin was his twin. Now, the reason I mention it is because from that point onwards in his life, his story of his life was rewritten. His whole history was rewritten, and his twin then had to decide, what am I going to incorporate into my brother's story? And what was fascinating was the whole question of what would he include in that history? What would he want his brother to remember? And he had to face the predicament of, do I tell him all the bad stuff that he did? Do I tell him all the awful stuff that was done to him? Or do I just tell him all of the nice stuff? So the reason I mention that is because I guess for each of us, when we're remembering, there's some stuff we can remember that can be horrible and tragic and we don't even want to think about. And there's some stuff that can be brilliant that we can easily forget as well. And I think it's important within all of this to actually remember there's been some amazing things that have happened in history. There's been some tragic things that have happened in history, but it's all part of our history and we can incorporate it all. And I think love covers all of it. So we have 10 moments of history about to come up. And the question for you is, do you remember the time? So we're going to have a moment of history come up, and you just have to tell me what the year is. If you can tell me what the year is, my lovely assistant down here will give you a timeout bar. Do you get it? I know. Okay, are we ready? Let's have a look at the first one. Do you remember the time? What is this, and when did it happen? Ruth, what is this moment of history?
It's when the Berlin Wall came down.
Okay, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and when do you think it was?
1989.
Ooh, let's have a little look. Bingo, yes. Well done, Ruth. It was on the radio. I know yesterday I was hearing about the anniversary of it. So we have a memory there, a wall that divided people. Imagine a wall that divides people. And that doesn't mean that all walls are awful, but we can remember at that point in history, something happened. Someone built a wall, something happened. People felt different things about that wall, and someone decided in the end it was best to bring it down. That is part of our history and part of our story. Let's have a look at the next one. What is it, and when did it happen? Hands, 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 hands. Sarah, come on, what is it?
It is VE Day.
VE Day, which was?
1945.
1945. What was VE Day, for those who don't know?
It was the end of the Second World War in Europe.
Brilliant. End of the Second World War in Europe. Round of applause for Sarah. So what might that memory be? Well, I was just thinking as simple as if you're in, 6 years of war, that can feel like forever when you're in the middle of something. I don't know if you've ever had a situation in your life and you think, this is never going to end. This feels like it's going to go on forever. Sometimes to just look at those people's faces and think, there is an end to some things. There will be an end to whatever season you're going through. There'll be a transition into something new. Okay, let's have another one. Ooh, what was it and when did it happen? Mick Fox, come on, sir.
1966.
And what happened in 1966?
England won the World Cup.
England won the World Cup. So for all you football fans, you can hold on to that fact that at one moment in history it was possible for the English football team to win the World Cup. Maybe there is hope for us. Okay, let's have another one. What was it and when did it happen? Hands, 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 hands. I need hands. Oh, who we got? Mr. Phil Craven over here. You're going to keep me fit today. Phil, what was it and when did it happen?
It was Live Aid, and it was 1985.
1985. Let's have a little look. Hey, I had to airbrush it out. So Live Aid, people from all over the world, musicians, creative people from all over the world got together to say, we can do something creative that can change the world, which might inspire people today in that memory to say, that was part of my history, part of the history of the human race, that we can get together, do some things that can make a difference. Okay, let's have another one. Ooh, we're going way back on this one. They didn't have photos on this one. Stuart's hand went right up. Oh, I'm going to go with Stuart because I saw it. There'll be another one for you, Keith.
1066.
1060. What is it?
Battle of Hastings.
The Battle of Hastings. That's from the, is it Bayeux Tapestry? They didn't have photos back then, so they sewed it. 1066. I don't know what we can learn from 1066, but it's definitely part of our origin story, isn't it? I was thinking it's fascinating how some people don't like people from other countries, but when you look at that, you realize we're all from other countries. We've all come from places all over the world, and if someone hadn't invaded our country once, then we'd all be very different. Okay, let's have a look at another one. What is it, and when did it happen? To some of you, this will look ultra-modern. To some of you, this looks like the oldest thing you've ever seen. What was it, and when did it happen, Mr. Connor?
The birth of YouTube, and I want to say 2006.
The birth of YouTube. So this is the first version ever of YouTube. Some of you are thinking, what's YouTube? Do you know, I can't actually remember what the number is, so we might just have a rumble for this one. You said 2006. Our survey says... Oh, he's one out. Should we give him a timeout anyway? Let's give him a timeout anyway. If only I had a memory and could remember all of these dates. Isn't that funny as well, though? How long ago is that? 14 years. That's, to some of you, it will seem like nothing. To some of you, that seems like ancient history. To some of you, it's before you were even born. You can't think of a world without YouTube, but some of us remember the world before the internet. Imagine that. When you went out and climbed trees and things like that. Look at me getting all funny. Anyway, next one. What is it, and when did it happen? We're on a similar vein here. Oh, Lucy, what do you think it is, and when do you think it happened?
2008 and new iPhone.
Do you know, that wasn't just the new iPhone. That's the first ever iPhone. 2008. It might have been close to that. Let's have a little look. 2007. 1 out. I think we'll give you that for 1 out. Well done, Lucy. Okay, let's have a look at something else. Oh, what was it? When did it happen? We have a hand over here. Heather.
It's the death of Princess Diana, and it's 1997.
Okay, 1997, the death of Princess Diana. Hands up if you can remember that day. Do you remember where you were? I think I was on a kids' camp somewhere. I remember that happened. Heather. And it was 1997. Round of applause for Heather. Very good. The only thought that comes into my head on this is, I remember someone talking about this, and they were saying the outpouring of flowers. I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? How many flowers are out there? And you think, did everybody love Princess Diana that much that they wanted to give flowers to her? Someone suggested that it might not have been about her specifically, but actually, sometimes all of our grief, we don't have a way of expressing it, which is why I love the things we've done with Halloween in the past. We've paused to actually remember some of the loss that we've had in our lives. And I think sometimes moments like this, when a celebrity dies, people are drawn so much to it because it's an opportunity to express a grief they might not have expressed in another way. But incredible anyway. Okay, let's have a look at another one. What is it, and when did it happen? Come on, Chris.
I don't know the date, but...
Just know the song. Son, man. Okay, does anyone know the date? Charlie, have you got it?
Date, but it was when Nelson Mandela was it when he was Prime Minister?
It wasn't Prime Minister, it was when he was freed from prison. He'd been in prison for how many years? 26, 27, something like that. Sarah Fox thinks she knows.
Was it 89?
89. Let's have a look. 90. It was 90. But we love Sarah. Let's give her a timeout. I mean, that's an incredible story, isn't it? The fact that somebody would be locked up for that long, and that actually, if you feel trapped within something, at least you can look back and say, at least I wasn't in it for 26 years. Anyway, next one. I think this is our last one. What is it, and when did it happen? Mr. Condi.
Tiananmen Square in China, and it was 1989.
Okay, Tiananmen Square, 1989. Our survey says. Excellent. Well done, Pete. Have we got a timeout for Pete over here? So yeah, I thought it was just interesting to have those different contrasts of history, and I think however we remember and whatever conclusions it bring us to, I think it's important to pause at points and think, actually, is there some hope that I can draw from these memories? Are there some perspectives, some contrasts that actually are going to help me with understanding my present a little differently? And now we have a movie clip from Chicken Run. And the reason we wanted to bring this in is because I guess for those of us of an older generation, there are certain things that we remember that have brought us to today. And some of us in the younger generation might not remember them. And it's easy for us in the younger generation not to appreciate kind of what it took to bring us today. And this kind of shows us that actually, once the chickens had escaped, they then taught the next generation where they had come from and how to really appreciate the freedom that they had. So whatever we celebrate today, at least we can celebrate that we are as free as we are, and maybe appreciate those that have brought us to that point. Okay.
Let's go!
That's for leaving. And this is for coming back.
Great Scott, what was that?
A Klingon carton! The entrance can't take it! Look at this. Bats! Scissors! Bingo! Lower me down.
But Ginger...
Just do it!
Increase velocity!
What does that mean?
you don't pedal. Put your drumsticks into it. That's what I told her. What? We were losing altitude, you see, and heading for fearful prey.
This is a lovely holiday. I'll be sad to go back.
Safety at all times is imperative. Now, wind her up and let her go!
So, is it as good as you imagined?
No. It's better. Come on, I'll show you how to play cricket.
Of course, the problem there that's being conveyed and gets conveyed is that the young chicks have no memory of what it took to get to what was so lovely. And to them, that's just normality. And so somebody has to remind them how we got here. And we all got here because of something. We all got here because of someone. And one of the problems of memory is that the power of memory is locked in emotion. And the emotion of memory can't always be translated to a textbook. So you can read stories of the horrors of World War I, World War II, 9/11, whatever, and just read it as facts that actually does nothing to you, therefore it draws nothing from you, therefore it doesn't inspire us to be anything or do anything or become anything, because it's just facts. But what we tried to do today, and particularly again by showing some of the clips we have, is that memories are an emotional thing. And a shared memory can be very powerful. And we all have to apply ourselves, should apply ourselves, ought to apply ourselves to emotionally connect with the memories of people, because they're important. The memories of history, because they were important. All that brought us to the journey, it's important. You know, I like the fact that when the Bible talks about Jesus, Jesus was emotionally attached to the people that he served. He was not detached. They were not subjects in a story. They were actually people in his life that he emotionally attached to. So let me bring us towards some conclusions tonight. And what I wanted to say was that memories are the link to both bondage and freedom. So if you were in, let's say, the First World War, your memories can bind you to the pain of that event. But those memories can also be the link to freedom because of that event. That shows you where the correction needs to come, where the forgiveness needs to come, where the love needs to come, where the healing needs to come. So the same memory links us both to bondage and to freedom. That's why we said that embracing our memories are important, because although they may attach us to a bondage, a pain, a sorrow, a sadness, they're also the thing that project us and move us forward into our freedom and into our hope, just like on Chicken Run. There's a little story in the Bible, I'm not going to talk a long time about this, way back in the book of Joshua in the Old Testament, that relates to the people, the children of Israel, and this deliverance from their bondage in the land of Egypt, and how, having left Egypt, crossed the desert. Then they crossed a river called the Jordan River, which led them into the place of freedom. And I find the Bible a fascinating book because it so readily latches into the important elements that we would miss in the journey of life. And what it latches into, it says, God said to Joshua, the Lord said to Joshua, send 12 of the tribal leaders into the river Jordan that had parted to let them through, and tell them each to collect a stone from the river. And let them bring those stones out of the river, and let them erect those stones on the freedom side of the river. And said, why do we do this? And he said, so that this will be a sign among you, that when your children ask, in times to come, what do these stones mean to you? You say these stones are a memorial for where we've come from. We're not forgetting where we come from. We're not forgetting the bondage, the pain, the hard labor, the difficulty. But sometimes we need those stones to remind us we came from somewhere to get here. And because we got here, we're going somewhere. And that our memories become the springboard to project us into the future. When they said this was the war to end all wars, somebody had hope that our memories would be so strong that we would bring those stones out of that river and say, we'll never go there again. We're still looking for that in our world. But war extends much further than battlefields in countries. War extends into hearts and into minds and into lives and into families and into experiences that require the same dealing with that memory to project us forward. And so that was what God says. You got to take a stone from that place because you're coming out. And you need to remember It's important you remember so that you have a measure for where you've come to. That's why history is important. It's why our past is important and why memory is so important. Stones from the river to remind you to look beyond the river in both directions. Now, this is one of the rare occasions that I would say to you, you need to look back. Many times I would say you don't need to look back, but this is one of those occasions because the stones from the river remind you to look beyond the river in both directions. You look back to where you've come from, but you look forward to where you're going. And where you're going becomes precious and glorious because you know where you've come from. And you guys need to appreciate, you may still have pain and sorrow and difficulty, but you made it to here. Get some stones out of that memory, and in the grace that God gives you, say, these stones are marker points to say, yes, it was that bad. Yes, it was that painful, but I've come through a river and I'm moving on, and these stones are telling me where I've come from. It's both directions. When we look back to look forward. So this one little thing came in my mind. I'll wind up with this. When crossing the road, what were you always taught to do? Look both ways before you cross the road so that you don't get run over. Well, in the context of how we attach ourselves to memory in our lives, when you're crossing the road of history, remember to look both ways. Look back and look forward, and then you won't get run over in the process, but you'll come to freedom. The fact we came from somewhere to get here actually means that we're going somewhere, and I believe there is a grace that flows from God into our lives to take us there. Let's just pray just one moment. Right now, for every family that is affected and in the midst of dealing with the issue of Alzheimer's and dementia, we pray a grace tonight, Father, in those families. Pray a grace and pray for light. Pray for moments to restore, because that memories are so important. And also I pray for every man, woman, boy, girl in here whose memories are painful because of where it was, and the war, and the battle, and the horror, and the thoughts, and the sadness, that they will not become anger and disillusionment. But I pray for a grace on those memories, that tonight we take some stones out of that river to realize we're making a crossing. By grace, we're making a crossing. And those stones now will be our story to our children that say we were there, and we've looked back at what we were, but we're not there any longer. And we're moving forward because grace is taking us on.